Gerhard Bloom here, once again looking at the tyranny and the delusions of the social justice movement. So I like to look at this victim culture that is enveloping us all, right? No longer do we venerate actual heroes. No, it's sniveling victims of imaginary oppression that we have to stand back and become deferential towards, except me, right? I think it's all nonsense. I'm not playing a part. I don't for a minute believe LeBron James is oppressed, racially or otherwise, right? He might be intellectually oppressed. Yeah, I don't doubt that for a minute. But he's not systemically oppressed. He's not oppressed by virtue of his race. No, nonsense. So have you noticed here in the dawning age, it's no longer heroism that's venerated, but victimhood. It's a latter-day gold rush. Everybody, it seems, is in a panic search to find some minimal group affiliation, some oppressed tribe to which they can attach themselves so they too can plausibly be viewed as oppressed, right? And once they've found this place, they then can point the accusing finger, right, at how the world has done them wrong, woe is them, and they need special treatment, right? Nobody wants to be without this minimal cloak of protection. And if there isn't one on the menu, right, if there isn't an obvious oppression category for you to sign up to, you can just invent one, right? You can be two spirits, or you can be non-binary. You can just invent a category and, presto, you're a victim, right? So to be a victim is to be worthy of sympathy, not mine, support, recognition, and yes, preferential treatment, right? This is blacks being admitted into Harvard with grades that just don't qualify them to get in. And Asian students who have marks exceeding those of the black students, they don't get in because allegedly there's too many Asians, right? Because Asians, even though they suffer terrible discrimination in the early years of the United States, when they first arrived, suffered terrible discrimination and yes, oppression, right? But no, they're no longer an oppressed category, and they're not actually. Asians aren't oppressed in the United States any longer, but they once were, right? Just as blacks once were. But no, Asians are allegedly white adjacent, right? They're purportedly mimicking white values, right? They're not mimicking white values. I think I've discussed this before. China, not communist China, imperial China, had a meritocratic bureaucracy hundreds of years before Western Europe did. There's been a long tradition of venerating scholarship and hard work. This is Asian culture, Chinese culture, and the Japanese, Koreans follow in a similar vein, right? They respect the education and what it can do for them, and their achievement testifies to that fact, right? Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indian Americans all out-earn the average American white family, right? And their kids outperform whites. And of course, they outperform the black community, which does have this significant achievement gap, not by virtue of a systemic oppression. No, it's all imaginary. So yes, they get, these oppressed groups get preferential treatment. Look at Biden's cabinet, a guy in a skirt, right? He is now the Surgeon General. It's ridiculous. Like these. And Kamala Harris, she's vice president because she's black and allegedly oppressed, right? Nonsense. Notice here the curious phenomenon of hate crime hoaxes. Aren't these hoaxes rather rare? No, actually. Wilfred Riley, he found enough material to fill an absolute book, right? Hate crime hoaxes, how the left is selling a fake race war. An excellent book, Wilfred Riley, right? So before you burn some peace sign on the lawn of somebody accused of a race hate crime, wait for the investigations. Odds are, and yes, I mean literally, the odds are the event was a dramatic performance. It's not enough now to be black and allegedly an oppressed member of this group. One has to stage manage shocking episodes of invented racial oppression. There simply aren't enough real ones to go around. This is a fact. There's not enough real anti-black racism to justify this oppression narrative, so people invent these shocking episodes. I'm not shocked anymore because I hear them and I know immediately, 95% of the time, absolute nonsense, right? So not enough real ones to go around. Look at Jussie Smollett, right? This incident was one of many such dramatic performances of oppression theater. Invariably, when these hoaxes are revealed for what they truly are, their reactions are more than sympathetic. After all, they point to a deeper truth, right? The deeper truth here is that at this point in history, the vast majority of people consider racial violence utterly unconscionable. That's a fact. Does anybody consider that if this Smollett case, this is Little Monty trying to hog some of the limelight, if this had happened to Jussie Smollett in 1950, southern United States, somebody beat him up, poured bleach on him, and hung a noose around his neck, would anybody have been shocked? No, nobody would have been shocked. There would not have been any outrage, right? The world reacted in horror, clutched their pearls. Oh, the poor Jussie Smollett. Although the whole narrative was from beginning to end ridiculously absurd, transparently false, and yet everybody, you couldn't take a skeptical view of this without being called a racist. Well, I called a skeptical view of this, adopted a skeptical view. Of course I was called a racist. It's nonsense. Call me it all you want. I'm not a racist. I'm just not stupid. Now these are vanishingly rare. So if they were common and as prevalent as we are led to believe in a systemically racist country, do you think there would have been this hysteria? No. So the reaction from around the world just shows you how much people are adverse to racial violence and hatred, right? So we truly are in a better place. And here's another interesting paradox, right? If racial oppression, systemic oppression, bigotry was so common, right? Why are so many white people trying to pass themselves off as members of an alleged oppressed minority group? In case you haven't heard, Alex Baldwin's wife, this Spanish wife, Hilaria, isn't all that Spanish after all. No, not even a little bit. So I don't know. Do I get to call her Hillary now? Does she still prance around with that ridiculous faux Spanish accent? I don't know. Curious viewers might want to investigate that. So yeah, she's just an Anglo, just like me, right? And I don't pretend to be a member of some oppressed group, right? And she's just as white as the very non-native Elizabeth Warren, right? Former U.S. presidential candidate, right? AKA Pocahontas, right? And, Rachel Dolezal, right? University professor, former chapter member of the NAACP. So what do you think that says about this ridiculous oppression narrative, right? Now consider, prior to the civil rights era, a great many light-skinned blacks tried to pass themselves off with varying degrees of success as white, right? There's no mystery here, right? Being white was, all things being equal, much easier for black people because the institutions were systemically racist and oppressive, right? And imagine, let's look at Nazi Germany, right? How many white German Christians do you imagine tried to pass themselves off as Jewish, right? That's right, absolutely zero. On the other hand, a great many Jews did try to pass themselves off as Germans, right? Racially German, right? To be Jewish at that time was to live in absolute terror, right? So And yes, systemic oppression was very real. It was a fact of life. And so Jews tried hard through whatever means possible to escape the oppression. Right? So in case you have trouble following this logic, in case there's some deluded leftists watching me now, people will try to make their lives easier, not harder. Right? So that explains this current paradox of people trying to pass themselves off as members of an alleged oppressed group. If that group was being actually oppressed, people within that group would try and pass themselves off as not being members, not the opposite, not members of the non-oppressed group, trying to identify with this faux oppressed group, right? Ridiculous, right? So, we've got to stop this absolute nonsense, and we have to recognize that now being a person of color gives you a certain amount of unearned social capital. Let's call that black privilege. And yes, that's a reality. Ask those Asian students that didn't get into Harvard because there's too many Asian students, right? People, the Asian students there aren't a carton of eggs or all the same, indistinguishable. No, they're human beings, right? And, race grifters like Al Sharpton, and Jesse Jackson, trying to squeeze dollars out of corporations because they think they're oppressed. It's all imaginary nonsense. And these racial preferences, they will affect you. Do you think the white elite that are supporting these ideas, these preferences, do you think that will affect their children? Well, reflect back on the college admission scandals. College admission scandals, where rich, white, frequently celebrities, bribed their kids in to Ivy League universities. They didn't give a fuck about equity. Right? They didn't care that some black kid was not getting in because their precious little Fabergé egg was admitted under scandalous circumstances, right? Bribed their kids' way into Harvard. They didn't have the grades. They didn't have the merit. They cheated their way in. Rich, white elites, they will continue to live lives of privilege. It will be you whose children's lives are affected, right? It's your kids who, after graduating university, are applying to corporations and to companies to get in, who don't get hired because they need to make some diversity quota, right? So somebody less qualified than your child, if your child happens to be white, doesn't get in for the sake of admitting somebody who doesn't have the chops for that job. The best person, man or woman, black or white, should get the job. These diversity quotas, it's shameful. And like I say, the rich, the elite, they will continue to live lives of the rich and famous. Robin DeAngelo, White Fragility. Should you read the book, White Fragility? Yes, you should read the book. Burn the book. No, read the book. You will see just how stupid she is. And it shocks me that people read this and think she has something intelligent to say. She tells white people that they are racially biased. And if they deny that they're racially biased, well, that's because their white fragility causes them to refuse to accept the truth of their inherent racism. She gets paid truckloads of money to tell white people just how racist she is. Although she's racist, but she's doing the work and she wants you to do the work and cut her a check for her, insipid, nonsensical book. Ridiculous. And then there's that charlatan, Ibram X Kendi, tells you, well, there's an achievement gap between whites and blacks. And you don't think blacks are just as good as whites? Oh, well, of course, yes. Well, then what else could it be but systemic oppression? So when you see achievement gaps, the default assumption is it's got to be systemic oppression. No, it does not. And the facts don't bear this out. Read my book, Deconstructing Social Justice. I will show you it's an absolute lie. And Yes, there's an achievement gap between the Asians, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Nigerians, who are every bit as black Americans. They out-earn American whites on average. Their kids outperform whites in school. Systemic oppression? Does that make sense to you? The whites designed the system to privilege themselves, and these other groups that are not white are outperforming them. No, it means this whole oppression narrative is an absolute lie. As, again, I remind you where we started, right? This victimhood nonsense, right? Absolute lie. People do not pretend to be a member of some really oppressed group so they can suffer real persecution. No, people try to make their lives easy. And if it means cheating the system, people will do that. At any rate, my temper got the better of me. I hope you noticed the new background here. A supporter of mine suggested I replace the Pulp Fiction poster with an American flag. Unfortunately, I couldn't get like an American flag that was a reasonable size. No, I'm a Canadian. Love Canada, notwithstanding what Trudeau was trying to do to the country. The greatest country to ever grace God's green earth is the United States of America. And I believe that sincerely. It has its crimes. What nation, what people does not? The important difference, the difference that makes a difference, is the United States has shouldered the burden of its guilt. It has changed laws. It has changed its constitution. The United States is the greatest country on God's green earth. The black civil rights leaders did not ask to tear down the Constitution or the principles of the United States, undermining the principles upon which the United States were founded. It called upon Americans to live up to its ideals. And those ideals are astonishing. They're a gift to the world. I thank you very much for your time and attention. I do hope you'll check out my book, Deconstructing Social Justice. I promise you, you will learn something. It took me 2 years to research and write this book. This ideology is poisonous. Thank you very much for your time and attention. No, the book is not important because I wrote it. I wrote it because the issues could not be more important. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.